Hello, everyone. Welcome to a new episode of GeoSpace.
I'm your host, Mohammed Salih, and it is great to have you with us for the New Regions bi-weekly deep dive into the fast-moving currents of Middle Eastern geopolitics. Our focus today is Iraq's parliamentary elections, which took place on November 11. The vote went ahead calmly and without major incidents, a welcome development for sure. Many observers view this round as especially important and consequential, given how much the region has been reshaped since October 7 and the fact that Washington is once again paying closer attention to Iraq after years of keeping some distance. To walk us through what is at stake, I'm joined by Hayder al-Shakeri, a leading Iraq analyst. Hayder is a research fellow with Chatham House's Middle East and North Africa program in London, and before that, he worked with the Arab Regional Cooperation Program at the Geneva International Center for Humanitarian Demining. We'll unpack what these elections could mean for Iraq's internal political landscape, its place in a shifting regional order, and how they might influence Baghdad's interactions with both the United States and Iran. Before we get started, just a quick note. You can catch GeoSpace on the New Regions website under the Watch tab, as well as on YouTube and SoundCloud. And if you are interested in broader regional coverage, including our recent pieces on Iraq and the election there, head to thenewregion.com. Hayder, really glad you could join us today. Welcome to GeoSpace.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Let me start with a general question. How did the recent parliamentary elections go? How would you describe the manner in which they were organized and held?
Thank you, Muhammad, and it's good to be on this podcast. Um, well, the elections on November 11th and also the special voting on November 9th, as the election cycles before those, they were organized in a very professional manner. Technically, they were very sound, and for the past few election terms, we have been having very safe elections, and people were going to the votes. But this time, we have been seeing a rising turnout. So for the election cycles beforehand, turnout was steadily decreasing. This time, it broke that cycle, and turnout was a bit more. And we can talk later about why turnout was more and what influenced this turnout.
Absolutely. Let's actually get to that right away. What brought about this higher turnout in this recent election compared to the previous ones?
Well, for starters, we talked about the special voting, and the special voting had some really high turnout rates. In some cities, it reached, I think, more than 99% of security forces going out to the vote. And this tells you something. It tells you that, many of these security entities have been, encouraging their members to go to the votes, and maybe even orchestrating some of the votes. As you know, different security entities are aligned with different parties, whether it's in the Kurdistan region or whether it's in federal Iraq. At the same time, for the past 3 years, Iraq has been having a relatively calm and stable environment where there has been a lot of money pouring into the country. That money has been translated into infrastructure projects, especially in the capital and some of the bigger cities, and that to a certain extent encouraged people to go out there and vote because they were benefiting from these projects. But additionally, the elections, the money that was spent on the elections by the political parties, by the elites, was tremendous. And reports have been mentioning that this was the most expensive elections in Iraq's history, where millions, if not billions of dollars were spent on campaigning, on voting, but also on buying either candidates or votes from constituents in areas across Iraq, and we can see the videos where candidates have been going to different areas and talking to constituents and maybe even distributing some gifts or even cash.
Right. You raise a very important point there, Hayder, with the amount of money and funds that were spent in this election, which, according to some reporting, the average seat in Iraq's 329 member parliament might have cost around 5 billion Iraqi dinars. And so, what kind of issues, what is it essentially that is bringing people out to vote? Is it the influence of, patronage networks that political parties and their machinery have built over the past couple of decades? Is it because there are certain issues that certain sections of the electorate really care about, and they are sort of energized by debates around those issues and go out to vote for them? Or is it, at some level, the ethnic and sect-based loyalties, that basically make people go out and vote?
Yeah, I think it's a mixture of these things, and in Iraq there are around 8 million people on the payroll, on the public payroll, between employees within the public sector, between pensioners, and between also people who receive some sort of social benefits. And most of these constituents, they do depend on the system one way or another, and through their jobs, they are usually influenced to go and vote, and these are some comfortable votes for the political elite. But also in these elections, we have been seeing a rise in the sectarian narrative by the political elite, and it comes, from across a spectrum where, the political elite have been pushing their constituents, their followers, to go out and vote to reclaim certain cities, or to push the narrative of the other sect, and this have created a debate on social media, and it revived some of the sectarian narrative that has been dormant for many years now in Iraq. And I don't think many people, many Iraqis, have bought into this, but certain constituents would go out and vote for these narratives, especially if mixed in with some material incentives, as the gifts we talked about earlier. But also, I mean, generally speaking, I think it's in certain areas where we saw the rise in those in the turnout, especially in the Kurdistan region, and in areas in Western Iraq and Northern Iraq, where the narrative, the sectarian narrative, has been sort of pushed by political elite to curb down on some of the influence by the political elite from the other sects.
Right. And just, so our audiences know, when I mentioned around 5 billion Iraqi dinars reportedly being spent on each seat, is about 4 million US dollars, given the, daily exchange rates. So, which is a, huge sum in the context of Iraq. The preliminary results, based on 97% of the votes counted so far by the Electoral Commission, are out. Prime Minister Sudanese Reconstruction and Development Alliance won, more seats than the other groups, in the mid 40s. The number of seats have not been really finalized yet, because there are more votes to count. But he failed to achieve half of the parliamentary majority, which is 165 seats. And to be honest, nobody expected him to do that, or any political group in the country. Were there any surprises or unexpected developments from these results so far? Something that really stood out?
Um, I think, major surprises, not really. I think Iraq has been going towards that direction for some time now. And, Sudanese coalition getting, you know, around 45 up to 50 seats was expected from before, and many analysts predicted that. Um, but what we're seeing now is, with after every election, you see the government formation process and the negotiations between the different parties. So this is what takes the time now, and this during these elections, this can be very short, and that is, probably non-realistic, or it can, prolong, and can be closer to a year of negotiations between the different actors to reach a consensus on government formation. So from the results themselves, there were no huge surprises. The turnout itself was some sort of a surprise, and some actors did really, really well. For example, the KDP have crossed the 1 million votes. Similarly, Halbusi's party did very well, despite Halbusi himself is no longer in power. So some of the actors did exceptionally well, and this is because of their positionality within the government, but also within the elite system in the country. But that doesn't mean that Sudani with the 45 seats, and these are the most number of seats that a single coalition has right now. Can do anything with the government formation, especially that his coalition is a bit of fragmented coalition. There are different parties and entities that have loyalties also in other places. And we can talk about government formation as well and then during the next questions.
Absolutely. As you know very well, the Iraqi election marathon hasn't really ended. It kind of, the big part of the game, kicks off right after the election results are out. And that is because of a ruling in 2010 by the Iraqi Federal Supreme Court that basically defined the largest bloc that would get the right to, to try to form the government as not the bloc or the group that won most votes in the elections, but the bloc, that is the largest in the parliament. So that opens up space for a lot of negotiations and efforts by different groups to join forces together and form the largest bloc. As things stand at the moment, who do you think has better chances of forming the next government?
Well, every time we had some sort of a consensus government, and I think this time will not be any different. I doubt that Sudani will go into opposition, and I doubt that at the same time he will have the power to form the next government. I think he will be a major actor in the formation of the next government. Um, but negotiations are already ongoing, and they even started before the elections. And we talked about the money that was spent pre-elections. Now there is a chunk of money that to be spent post-elections on forming the coalition that will sort of influence the next government formation. So in the last cycle, MPs were offered also millions of dollars to join certain parties, and there is reporting on this. And I think, because of the vast amounts of money that exists right now across the political elite and the spectrum, and the number of businessmen who joined this election, money will still be an actor in the government formation process. And we'll see, people shifting alliances. We'll see some, smaller coalitions and parties that will be, joining, the bigger blocks to influence, basically the choice of the prime minister. And until now, there is no clear picture. We are seeing, political elites, the Shia political elites specifically meeting with each other. People who haven't talked for a long time, are now getting back in touch and going to visit each other in order to, make the deals and, maybe even sort of make the agreements on blocking certain actors. So, for example, we're seeing within the Shia coordination framework, there are certain, tactics that are already happening. Sudani was excluded from one of the meetings where they were discussing, the prime minister's selection criteria. For example, we heard that they are appointing someone to go and talk to Muqtada Sadr so that the Sadrists are not out of the game completely. Sadrists should be involved one way or another so that they don't, use their street power against, the political system. So these conversations will continue, and I think. As it stands right now, no one has, the complete power. But it seems like, Sudani didn't really get the number of votes that allows him to comfortably negotiate and for the prime minister position. So he will negotiate as one of the big actors within the coordination framework in the time being.
Right. Well, to your point about elections making old political foes or enemies touching base again, in a way, it makes elections like Eid in Iraq, right? Old enemies get back together, after elections. So you mentioned Sadr. Before I actually move to my next question, I want to ask about Sadr a little bit. What kind of role do you think, he's poised to play in this government formation process, given the fact that he has actually, boycotted the formal political process since 2022? Like, is there any room for him to influence the government formation process in any meaningful way?
Um, So Muqtada Sadr has been out of the formal political process for some time now, but the Sadrist trend, they still have, some senior positions within the government. For example, the Secretary General, the Council of Ministers, is a senior Sadrist, and he's there, for many years now. Um, I don't think the Sadrists will inform the government formation process much, but they will still play a role within the next period. And I think one of the strategies that Sadr has in mind was for this government, the former government, and this coming one, to sort of fail so that they can come out and say, see, we told you so, and we are, here as an alternative. But that hasn't happened yet because, of the political stability that's out there, because of, the sort of securing Iraq out of the regional conflict. That played a role in all of this. So I think Sadrists have been, excluded from that for a while, and it shows, the sort of even the full public support to Muqtada. It shows even in the turnout, as even though there were calls for boycott from Sadr himself, and I think many of the Sadrists did boycott, but it didn't show from a wider spectrum of the Iraqi Shia community. So for the time being, I think Sadr will be consulted. I don't think, as the Shia house as a whole, they don't want to exclude him completely, especially certain actors, some of the more moderate people within the Shia coordination framework, such as Ammar al-Hakim. They would want to keep everyone happy, everyone involved. Um, but he will not have direct access to the government formation negotiations. As you know, now the competition is very hard between, people like Noor al-Maliki, Qais al-Khazali, and Sudani.
Right. There's also, something to be said here about Sadr's ambitions, that or hopes that his boycott of the electoral process and the broader political process might affect the legitimacy of the system, which might to some extent, but I think it's an important and notable fact that given his boycott, turnout was still quite significant, even though some people, debate or dispute the method of counting the turnout. But it is the same method at the previous elections in 2021, and it's gone up by about 12 points to about 55. It's also important, that to note that in the previous election in 2021, Sadr got around 885,000 votes, which translated to 73 seats. But the number itself, 885, is not that huge. So it might have been actually predictable that void could have been filled by a higher turnout. So my next question is, what a lot of people are asking today: does incumbent Prime Minister Mohammed al-Sudani really, have a chance of forming the next government and retaining his office?
Um, Well, this is the question, right? And I think uh, since former Prime Minister Noor al-Maliki was put back as for a second term, this trend has not happened again. And one of the reasons behind this is Noor al-Maliki himself with his veto on anyone, coming back as a prime minister again. Um, so that's why they are trying to have some sort of a document stating clearly what are the conditions for each prime minister as a Shia House, as a Shia coordination framework. Uh, so when it comes to the Shia coordination framework, there is a big chance that the big actors, which are Noor al-Maliki and Qais al-Khazali, are they have the veto against Sudani. Um, but then there's this regional aspect as well, where Sudani has been able to sort of navigate the Shia coordination framework in a way to shield Iraq from the bigger regional conflict, to talk with Iran, but at the same time talk with the US, and to sort of keep Iraq's momentum going when it comes to the reconstruction, when it comes to the development, when it comes to utilization of the money. And the Shia coordination framework helped him a lot in that mission, and they sort of empowered him to do so. So for many, a second term for Sudani might seem like the best solution right now to keep this momentum going. However, for Maliki and Khazali, they think that Sudani is becoming too big and too powerful, and they don't want another powerful actor to be added to the table. So they will keep on vetoing him. Uh, and at the end of the day, usually the prime minister is someone who comes out from the negotiation, someone who is not that well known, someone who's not that powerful, and someone who would sort of manage the different wishes from the different actors within the Shia coordination framework.
Right. I think, if I'm not mistaken, there was an agreement inside the coordination framework after 2021 elections, that Sudani should not or would not, run for premiership or in the elections in 2025, which is the recent elections we had. So, there seems to be a lot of anger, especially on the part of Maliki, who I think recently described the position of prime minister as more of a professional managerial position, not a political one, which also goes to show how this critical position within the Iraqi state, the most important and consequential one, is being viewed, which is, interesting. But I guess we'll have to wait and see if Sudani will have will be able to put together the largest parliamentary bloc. I think it's also important to note that some of the people within his alliance, the Reconstruction and Development Alliance, are, groups which are known to have a close relationship with Iran and the coordination framework, right? People like Faleh
Mhm.
Fayyad, Ahmed al-Asadi. And so, there's a chance of these people also defecting at some point, and that would be a blow to his position. What about the U.S. position? Do you see the U.S., being keen on supporting Sudani for a second term or no? Like the Iraq special envoy appointed in Washington, Mark Savaya, he has been, posting on X in the last, over the past few weeks, and his posts seem to be quite friendly towards Sudani, typically, you could say even full of praise one way or another for him. Do you think that there is a chance that the US might want to support him?
Yeah, as I said before, I think, it is very logical to support Sudan, especially, from actors such as the US, where, they managed to sort of shield Iraq from the conflict, the regional conflict. But at the same time, many in the US have been seeing that, by empowering Sudani, the Shia coordination framework has been empowered, and some of the Iran aligned groups within the Shia coordination framework have been having a bigger role within the government. And we're seeing this even after the elections where حقوق أصحاب الحق صادقون and others like خدمات and different alliances, different political parties who are on different degrees that are close to Iran have been having bigger and bigger political influence, bigger and bigger economic influence. So, the fact that Sudani have sort of shielded Iraq from Iranian influence is not very accurate. But, from the conflict generally in the region, I think that's what Sudani, but the larger Shia coordination framework, were successful in doing so. So the U.S. Their position is not that clear. Mark Savaya, I think he has been, closer to Sudani to a big extent, and I think that's because of the previous conversations with them and the agreements, even before Savaya became the envoy. Uh, but I think the US will support a position where they would want to sort of curb Iranian influence inside Iraq, and they will, support any candidate that will be put out there who will sort of have that position. And The Shia coordination framework, they know this already, and I think whichever candidate that they come out with, whether it's Sudani or someone else, and I think it's going to be someone else, they will have that mentality that, they are not too close to Iran.
Right. I think, given what you just said, a bigger question that might be on the minds of many is, we see that Washington has taken a more proactive approach in a way to Iraq since President Donald Trump came to office in January this year. We have heard US officials, including Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Envoy Mark Savaya, say that, armed groups need to be disarmed. And recently we had Iraqi Foreign Minister Fuad Hussein tell Al Arabiya TV channel that the US wants six armed factions excluded from the government. He didn't name any names. So, but all of this sort of seems to point out that we are likely to see a more tumultuous government formation process this time around. Do you agree with that? And do you think US would or is really in a position to be able to shape, the post-election government formation process in a way that would, culminate in the exclusion of some of these pro-Iran armed factions, which have their political wings in the government?
I think at the end of the day, it's an Iraqi decision, and it happens within, the Iraqi political elites, corridors and negotiations. But there definitely is influence from both the US and Iran, and they push in different directions, right? So that will still be there. But the US, for the US in particular, they have, I think, maybe two main missions in Iraq. The first one is to curb on Iranian influence as much as possible and to sort of prevent Iran from using Iraq economically uh, to, especially to, sort of bypass sanctions and other things. And the second thing is to have some sort of economic relationship with Iraq directly as the US. And we're seeing this, by the push to bring back US companies, by the pushes for investments from President Trump, in the Gulf and other areas. So there is some sort of a transactional relationship that the U.S. wants from the different countries around the world, and Iraq is not an exception. So in order to accomplish those two objectives, I think the U.S. will try to push for someone who is not too close to Iran, someone who in the best case scenario, who has, the same distance from Iran and the US and can, still talk to the Iranians and sort of negotiate with them and push in a certain direction, but at the same time, be very positive with the Americans and, continue the engagement with the Americans to have that bilateral relationship shaping up even more.
Right. And how about Iran? You mentioned Iran. Like, who do they prefer to be the, prime minister in Iraq, in Baghdad? Do you think they would be fine with having Sudani continue for another term, or, is there anything that might have pieced them too much that, wouldn't make them support Sudani?
Well, I mean, Iran is weakened right now, so they don't have that same big influence that, Qasem Soleimani used to have when he used to come to Iraq and meet with different actors, but they're still very influential, right? And uh, again, I think it is an Iraqi decision to choose who the prime minister is, and uh, but I think some of the Iraqi actors, especially those that are too close to Iran, they would reach out to Iran for guidance to push in certain directions and to push for certain candidates. Um, so I think Iran will not want to get involved as much, but they will have to, and they will try to keep on that relationship ongoing, where Iran is, able to access Iraq, access certain politicians, access Iraq's economy, and that's because that is the relationship that Iran enjoyed with Iraq for the past 20 years, and they don't want to change that. But at the same time, Iran realizes that they are much weaker now, so I don't think they're in a position to go directly against the US or Israel in these instances and try to influence government formation too much. But maybe behind closed doors they would.
Right. And I think because of those reasons that you mentioned, Sudani might actually seem to be a good candidate because he seems to have, opened up some doors with the US. He knows how to deal with the US. And he really hasn't done anything that would, be considered detrimental to Iranian interests in Iraq. And I'm saying that because,
Mm.
some of the reporting or analysis on this tends to, frame this as a binary, as Sudani being pro-American, which, by omission or, commission seems to suggest that he is anti-Iran or, in the opposite camp when it comes to Iran. But I think that would be a misreading of the reality of his term and his track record in office for the past 3 years. What about Iraq's other neighbors? Iraq has also some other important and powerful neighbors, whether that's Turkey in the north or the Gulf states in the south, and these countries seem to think that they have the wind behind them as a result of the recent regional developments, the fall of the Assad regime, the weakening of Hezbollah, the weakening of Iran itself. Do you think they are poised to play sort of a more proactive role in the government formation process in Iraq by backing, some of the Iraqi factions?
Yeah, that's a very good question. But just going back to Iran and to Sudani, I think that's why I'm saying it's an Iraqi decision. And I'm not saying Iraqi as in, the Iraqi society will decide, but the Iraqi political elite will decide. So, Qais and Noor al-Maliki, Qais Khazai and Noor al-Maliki, they have the veto against Sudani. And maybe, for Iran and the US, Sudani would be a good, candidate, and he's someone they know, they've dealt with, and to a big extent, they know what to expect. Anyone new, they might be coming up with new strategies and new ways for work. But the veto against Sudan is coming from inside the political elite in the country, and the Sunnis and the Kurds, they will go with whoever the Shia Cornish framework agree on, whether it's Sudani or someone else. So the veto is from maybe two or three actors within the coordination framework. On the rest of the region, I think that's a very very important question, and Sudani to a big extent managed to shield Iraq from the conflict by focusing on Iraq, focusing on internal dynamics, focusing on development within Iraq, focusing on the Iraqi people to a big extent, and pulling out from much of the negotiations that were happening regionally, and trying to keep one distance from Iran, from the US, from even within Syria. The relationship has been very carefully approached by assigning a person or two to kind of get involved in the conversation. And I think Sudani have managed to start with some sort of a bottom line where the next prime minister, whether it's Sudani himself or others, they would continue this sort of strategy because it deemed to be successful to a large extent. Other actors getting involved in the Iraqi sphere, I don't see it as much. It's mainly Iran and the US who would want to sort of shape the political scene. But the Gulf, Turkey, Syria to a lesser extent, I think they get involved with certain political actors. They do support. They show their sort of. Alliance with specific personnel or parties, but they wouldn't push too much into the government formation process. They wouldn't, try to influence how the decisions are made, unless, it's for, some places like Kirkuk, where there's a lot of power competition there, and we see sometimes Turkey and others getting involved and supporting specific candidates, or even pouring some money into certain areas. So other than that, I think Iraq will still try to balance, those relationships, especially between the U.S. and Iran, in order to keep Iraq isolated, or as isolated as possible from the current, and it's an ongoing war, I would say, and Iraq will still want to be out of it as much as possible because Iraqis can't afford to get into another war right now.
Right. Let's, get a little bit to other communities and their domestic political scenes in Iraq. Let's start with the Kurdish side. Do you think the Kurds are in a position to be able to shape or influence the outcome of the government formation process in any meaningful sense, apart from having to, sign on to whatever name the coordination framework would end up selecting? Or are they in a position, especially given the divisions between the KDP and the PUK, to play a meaningful role, be the kingmaker as they used to, at least until 2010 and 2014?
Definitely, yes. I mean, the Kurds in general, they have a huge role within the Iraqi democracy, and the KDP with its organization and getting a million votes have proved that they can be a decisive factor. Uh, and what I can say about the both the KDP and the PUK, but other parties as well, is that they can play a big role in speeding up the process, but also in sort of slowing it down. And we saw this before when the Sadrs were trying to form the government. They made the alliance with some of the Kurds. And that really, obstructed the government formation because there was the الثلث المعطل, or the one third that blocked everything from going forward with the other Kurds. So because the Kurds are not unified, and I believe that until today, a year after the Kurdish elections, there's still no government in the Kurdistan region, and I think now government negotiations have re-sparked with the negotiations for the president and the government in Baghdad. So I think the Kurds will be very much involved within the internal politics of the Kurdistan region at first, and that's going to be their priority. But also, I think from the 2021 experience, they have learned that they shouldn't go with one actor or the other. And speaking to some Kurds, I think they realize this now. And they would wait for the coordination framework or the Shia House to come out with any candidate, and they would just say yes, and then they would continue their negotiations for their own government, but also for the president, and then later on the Kurdish ministers, and minister which party takes which ministry.
Right. Moving to the Sunni political scene, do you see the Sunni forces, being in a position to also play, an important role, or given the level of disorganization and fragmentation in the Sunni political scene, they won't be able to play that sort of role, and have to again go with whatever is decided inside the coordination framework, or if the U.S. Iranian involvement gets too deep with what comes out of that competition between those two sides.
Uh, I think it's similar with the Sunnis to a big extent. There is now a Sunni strongman to a big extent, and it's Halbusi, who has been emerging. But at the same time, other actors, if they unify together, they can be a strong, opponent. But to a big extent, I think many of them are pragmatic, so they would meet together, they would try to resolve it, and I'm already seeing pictures of meetings between the different Sunni party leaders where they're negotiating the speaker position, and they're negotiating their sort of alliances for the next phase. Um, but I mean, there are always surprises, right? And Halbusi, for example, has been saying that he wants to be the president now, not just the speaker. And if they push for this, then new sort of dynamics will emerge, and that will lead to other conversations, and I don't think that will happen, but I think it's one of the tactics for Halbusi to put out there, so that it's easier for them to get the speaker position. But at the end of the day, I think the system that the Americans laid out, and then the Iraqi political leaders agreed on and stamped, and then they followed, and then they shaped later on, the Muhassasa system will continue as it is right now, without a major shakeup, where the Shias will decide for their candidate, and the Sunnis and the Kurds will say yes, and that's how it will be in the future, as long as they get their ministries. And I think that's for them. If they get two or three important ministries, then they will agree on whoever the next prime minister is.
You mentioned a very important point that a lot of people outside of Iraq might not be actually paying much attention to, and that is the ambitions of some Sunni political figures to become the president of Iraq, or to have presidency go to a Sunni politician, regardless of who that figure might be, Halbusi or someone else. Do you think there is a chance that the Shia political class will actually agree to have a Sunni political figure, especially someone of some weight and ambition, to be Iraq's president? Given the role of presidency in Iraq is mostly referred to as being a ceremonial one, but it's actually part of the executive branch. The president is the protector of the constitution, and so has some leeway to exercise some power actually over the government. And do you think, given all of that, and given the regional transformation and the decline of the Iran, and it's sort of mostly Shia access, would be conducive to a Sunni becoming the president of Iraq and getting the approval of the Shia political class for that?
Well, anything is possible, but I think it's too early for that, at least in this parliamentary term. I think this time um, uh, all actors will try to continue with the system as it is and try to get as much as possible from the ministries and from the government resources. So it's the same game that's being played usually, where different ministries are given to different political parties, and those political parties will utilize those ministries. But Sudan started something new, which is to give people some sort of the bare minimum. So now people are getting some services, some infrastructure, not their full rights, but to a certain extent, some. And this will have to be given by the political elite to a big extent. When it comes to changing that equation and changing the rules of this game, I think it's too early for this right now. It's There will need to be some sort of a major shakeup, and the regional aspect um, is important, but it's not seen internally when it comes to the political scene. The current political stability of the system is continuing, and when some Sunni actors might say that they want to change this, I think they will see a big resistance from the other actors, the Kurds and the Shias, because that will open different doors. And then let's not forget the role of the courts here as well, and the Federal Supreme Court and also the Higher Judicial Council. I think to a big extent, if major shakeups come into play, I think they will block it. And they did block Halbusi once because he was getting too powerful too quickly, and I don't think he will be allowed to go in that direction again.
Right. You mentioned the judiciary, and the judiciary has really become a very powerful organ or institution of the state, especially in the recent years. They've intervened after some consequential elections in the past, notably in 2010 and 2021, in ways that has sparked a lot of controversy. And today, actually, as we speak, the Federal Supreme Court of Iraq declared that the parliament's term has ended on election day, and that as of election day, which is November 11, the current government of Prime Minister Soudani is now a caretaker government without the authority to make any major decisions or sign any agreements. Some have already reacted to this. They see this as being controversial, and some have argued that this was not the case in the past elections, and that, for example, after the 2018 election, which was held in May 2018, the parliament in June, 1 month after elections, went on to actually pass the new election law. And so, there's a lot of inconsistency in terms of how these decisions are being made by the judiciary. Is the judiciary actually positioning itself to play a decisive role in the post-election government formation process once again? And I think it's also, useful to keep in mind that the chief of the judiciary, Judge Fayed Zaidan, recently wrote an article for the Pan-Arab al-Sharq al-Awsat Daily, where he basically said that, the government has to be formed within the constitutional time frame of 4 months. And he even went as far as saying, that the election date, November 11, was unconstitutional, which was an interesting claim to make right a couple of days before the elections. And then he actually went on to vote himself on the election day. So it kind of seems, there's kind of a game of positioning by certain figures and institutions within the judiciary, self-positioning in a way to be able to influence the course of events, even in a surprising and unexpected way. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, for the past few years, we have been seeing, the judiciary playing, you know, a bigger and bigger role. I think before that, the most major thing that we saw was the 2010 post-election ruling. But now it's, coming out more and more between Kurdistan and region and federal Iraq on certain laws that are being legislated and also on post elections and now even pre-elections. And I think this is because within this system there has been some sort of a hole that's being left, and there needs to be some decisive figure that would come there and put in a position. And the judiciary took that space and started taking those decisions. And we've been seeing for the past few years, we had always the three presidencies: the parliament, the prime minister, and the president. But now more and more we've been seeing the four presidencies where Fagh Zaidan or whoever is the head of the Judicial Council is being part of these meetings, and they are taking, a bigger role in, defining the major sort of trajectory of where the political process is heading. And we've been seeing that more and more often. And I think they will play a role for sure, especially if there is some sort of chaos that would emerge. They would go to one direction or another, and usually those directions are, sort of in line with the sort of vision of the system itself, the Muhassas system, and how it was built. And I think they will try as much as possible to continue to maintain that system from collapsing.
Right. Do you see like a scenario where we will have like protracted and long-term paralysis after this election, meaning that, different political sides fail to form a government because of the fragmentation and the polarization within the Iraqi political scene, but also the conflicting agendas of the US, Iran, and maybe some of the other regional country, that we will have a protracted paralysis, a state of paralysis, whereby the current government will continue in a caretaker government, and we'll be, having this for maybe more than a year or two even.
I mean, every time we had an elections, the government formation process has been, taking some time, and that time has been increasing. And this cycle is no difference. I think there will be an elongated sort of set of conversations, but what's different right now is the regional element and the sort of pressure from both the US and Iran on Iraq to form the government, and the current caretaker government can last for a while, but they will need a budget eventually. They will need some sort of mandate to continue to push for whatever is keeping the stability alive, and that will not be there, especially with the vetoes that are around Sudani, and if he's an active part of this government formation process. So I think, realistically speaking, they will try their luck with a few months of negotiations, but people will have, and the political elite leaders, they will have to make some compromises, and this is what usually happens, right? They come to a compromise at the end where everyone is involved in one way or another within the government process. Different actors are giving different proportions, and then everyone rules together. And I think, for the time being, for the next 2 months, 3 months, everyone will try to use as much leverage as they can within these conversations. But later on, they will set the sort of the smoke will settle, and then they will get their shares.
Right. My final question for you would be, I don't want to put you on the spot, but if you were to place bets on any names who, you think might have a decent chance of becoming the prime minister, what would be some of these names?
Uh, I mean, many names have been, coming out there, and they've been speaking about people like Qasim Laraji, like the former Minister of Youth and Sports. They've been speaking about, Hamid al-Shatri, who's the head of intelligence. Basim al-Bideri, who's the head of the Commission for Justice Accountability. So there are different names that are being thrown out there, but I think eventually it will be someone who is willing to make that compromise. And all of these people, uh, I think to a big extent, they are part of a different party, uh, and they might not be the best fit for this. Um, so I would say it would be someone who we did not expect before, and it would be someone like Sudani, who was always out there, who was always, hustling in one way or another, for a lack of a better term. But then, they would bring them and put them, on the front lines, and they will manage, this sort of chaos that we will have within the next government.
All right, that brings us to the end of today's discussion. Hayder, it's been a real pleasure having you on the show and hearing your thoughtful take on Iraq's elections and the broader political shifts underway. For our listeners, Hayder al-Shakeri is a research fellow with the Middle East and North Africa program at Chatham House in London. And to everyone tuning in, thank you as always for listening. We'll be back in 2 weeks with another episode of GeoSpace.